very, very excited because last year, Karthik and I did a similar session, and for some reason, they put it at like 8 o'clock at night, and we ended up having an amazing 7 people join our session. So this is awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to discuss cloud compliance and assurance and auditing. My name is Andres Silva. I lead a team of specialist solutions architects for cloud operations. So we focus on a number of services, and part of that is the services that have to do with the use case of compliance and auditing. Super excited to be here, and I want to take a moment to let my other 2 co-presenters introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Karthik Vishnath. I lead the engineering team for AWS Config.
Hi everyone, my name is Suchita Verma. I am the product manager for CloudTrail.
All right, so these are the experts on config and CloudTrail, so we're very excited to have them here today. So our goal with this session is that by the end of it, you have a better understanding of some of the most advanced features that our platforms provide to help you with compliance and auditing while managing cloud infrastructures. That's our commitment to you, so hopefully we deliver at that. Here's how we're going to do it. So we've done a number of sessions on compliance in previous Reinforce, reInvent. So this is kind of like a continuation of some of the newer challenges that we're hearing from customers and some of the things we've done, and we can provide you to help you with that. So with that in mind, we're going to meet our friend John, the cybersecurity engineer. You know that the best way of teaching is to tell a story. So we're going to tell you a story, and that's where we're going to meet that character. We're going to talk about some new challenges with compliance, how config can help, how CloudTrail can help, and how Audit Manager can help. So let's get started. Like I said before, we've done a couple of sessions. If you're interested in watching them, feel free to take a picture of this or scan this QR code. It's going to take you to the videos of it. They're on YouTube. But in those sessions, in an effort to tell the story, what we did is we introduced you to this person called John. He's a cybersecurity engineer. He's been wrapping up on AWS compliance. He's eager to learn. And we continue the story here. He has already deployed Control Tower, and he has configured his CloudTrail. He has it set up. He has customized and deployed some conformance packs with AWS Config. And he's even using Systems Manager automation for some automated remediations, right? So you may identify yourself, some of you, with John, right, and his journey. He's getting there. He's already getting his feet wet with compliance. He's doing some things with Conformance Pack. But he has some new things that have come up as he continues to dive deep. You know, he has some challenges about managing risk, simplifying rule authoring, as you can see here, shift left for compliance, or what we call proactive compliance. That's something that our friend John is facing. Also analyzing CloudTrail logs. You know, he has the CloudTrail data there, but it's been challenging for him to kind of use it, right? It's just sitting on an S3 bucket. He wants to get some insight from that data. And also, he has already started using some Audit Manager, but he wants more, right? He wants more granular control of the data that is being produced. He wants to be able to pinpoint exactly what the auditor is looking for. So these are some of the things that we want to talk to you about and showcase for you today so you can take advantage of them. First of all, before we start, let me see. There you go. So all the information that we're going to be sharing with you today is part of what we call the Cloud Operations Model. And it's essentially a set of tools, guidance that we provide for our customers to take advantage of all these things that you see here, right? And the Cloud Operations Model basically involves setting up, build and migrate, and operate, as you can see there. So this is just a little tiny bit of what that Cloud Operations Model is made up of. Now, someone may ask, well, why are we defining the Cloud Operations Model? Why is AWS defining that? Well, you know, what we're doing essentially is just sharing some of our learnings, and the data that you see on the screen right now shows the scale at which we operate and manage infrastructure, millions of active customers, more than 1 billion end users served by our customers. Here's some interesting things. Over 6 quadrillion metric observations in CloudWatch. 600 billion auditing events per day on CloudTrail. And over 8 billion resource configuration changes and 9 billion compliance checks each month. So I give you an idea of the scale at which we're operating. We've learned a lot while doing this, and we just want to share it with you, and that's why we have this cloud operations model. So to get started, at the outset, I called out a few challenges that John is facing regarding managing risk. So I'm going to invite Karthik to talk a little bit about how AWS Config can help with that.
Thanks, Andres. How some of the services in Config as well as the other AWS services interact with each other. In the journey of setting up Config, the first functionality that you're going to do is create a config recorder. Right? What your config recorder does is it's going to track the changes to your AWS resources. And every time a resource changes, the config recorder creates what's called as a configuration item, a CI. Right? Built on top of a config recorder is config rules. Every time your config recorder generates a CI, config rules is actually going to consume that CI and going to run an evaluation for compliance based on the configuration item. Right? And built on top of config rules is, you can see some of the various AWS services. I'll pick on a couple of them. If you look at Security Hub, for example, Security Hub has this concept called Security Hub Standards, which has a bunch of Security Hub controls. And these Security Hub controls are nothing but config rules. Similarly, if you look at Conformance packs, the Conformance packs is a collection of config rules. The reason why I call this out is you can see that if you want to deploy a Security Hub or Conformance pack, you have to enable config recorder and you have to have config rules running, right? So, and it's important to understand this interaction between these, how these services work, because as we start talking of some of the other features in config, this will be relevant. All right, so like Andres mentioned, so John has set up his config recorders as well as config rules. Everything is working fine. But what starts to happen is somebody accidentally changes what's configured in your config recorder. So let me give you an example. So your requirement is all data that is stored at rest needs to be encrypted. So what John has done is he needs to track an S3 bucket. I'm just picking an example of S3 bucket. So he has a resource type of S3 bucket that he's enabled his config recorder to track. And he has also deployed config rules that is going to check to see if the S3 bucket has encryption enabled by default. Everything is working fine. Now, someone accidentally went and changed their config recorder, and they've stopped tracking the S3 bucket. So if you remember, I mentioned earlier, your config recorder generates a configuration item, and the config rules is actually going to consume that configuration item. Because I've stopped tracking the S3 bucket, I no longer am going to create a configuration item which is going to track the change of that S3 bucket. So, and now subsequently, if you're making changes to this S3 bucket or you create a new S3 bucket, your config rule is not going to evaluate. You're not going to run your config rule, which means you have a stale compliance information for that S3 bucket. So this could either be a false positive or a false negative, depending on the result of how the resource has been created. Now, this is an issue, right? What we launched last week is an ability for you to detect this drift detection in your config recorder. So the way we are going to support drift detection is we have this new configuration item or a CI, which is going to track your config recorder. So anytime your config recorder changes, meaning if I change what resource types I'm tracking as part of your config recorder, we generate a CI. Right? So now you can programmatically track this configuration item and see if this resource type list that you're tracking is exactly the list that you want. So in this particular case, if someone accidentally went and removed the S3 bucket as a resource type for the config recorder to track, now you have a configuration item that's actually going to let you know that you have a changed resource type list, and you can actually take an action on that. This configuration item is enabled by default. There's nothing for you to do. It's free of cost. It also integrates with your config aggregator as well as advanced queries. So if you want to write queries to periodically track these configuration items, you actually can. So that's one way of how you can manage risk. The second, let's use the same example where I have encryption at rest. John has his the recorder set up perfectly, and rules are set up. Everything's working fine. For config to generate a CI successfully, one of the requirements is config needs to have permissions to make describe calls. When you create a config recorder, the SLRs are automatically set up, so there's nothing for you to do. But subsequently, someone can go and change the permission. If someone goes and changes the permission, and going with our same example, I've gone and removed permissions so that config cannot make describe calls on S3 buckets. Config cannot generate your configuration item. And if a configuration item is not generated, the rule is not executed. And if your rule is not executed, you're looking at a stale compliance state for that particular resource. Earlier this year, we launched integration with CloudWatch Metrics. One of the metrics for this use case that we added support for was error metrics. Specifically, it is insufficient permission. So anytime you go and change your permissions, and you make a config tries to create a configuration item, and if it fails because of insufficient permission, then this metric is going to get incremented. So if you have a non-zero value for this metric, then you know you have a problem, because now config has failed to generate configuration item for some resource. We don't know what resource, but I think that, so what John can effectively do is you can programmatically check if the insufficient permission metric has a non-zero value, then I have a problem in my system. Right? Along with CloudWatch Metrics, along with the integration with CloudWatch Metrics, we've also added support for usage, so he can look at what's the usage from the various resource types. So these are a couple of tools that John can use for managing risk with the recorder. Next, if you look at conformance packs, with conformance packs it's a powerful mechanism when you want to deploy multiple rules at the same time, right, for an account. Instead of keeping track of, if you have, let's say, 20, 30 rules that you want to deploy across multiple accounts, instead of keeping track of every single rule, you can create this one conformance pack template, and you can deploy that template. So it simplifies your deployment. What we launched earlier this year is also the ability for you to track compliance in a data-driven way for a conformance pack. Right? So if I've deployed a conformance pack, I have a bunch of rules and bunch of resources that's associated with this conformance pack. Single glance, I can look at a numerical value and I can see how compliant I am. Right? The way we compute the score is your numerator is your number of compliant rule resource combinations, because one resource can have multiple rules associated with it. And your denominator is the total number of rule resource combinations. So you get one metric that tells you how compliant you are. If you're 100%, then all your resources are compliant. 0% is the other extreme, where none of your resources are compliant. Right? So it's an easy way to, back of the envelope way for John to actually look at, okay, how compliant is this conformance pack. The other benefits with these is, if you have multiple conformance packs in your account, you can also take a look at, okay, which is the most non-compliant conformance pack, and then I can focus the efforts there first. So it's an easier way for you to prioritize at how you want to remediate your non-compliant resources. And also, if you make a change, if there's a deployment, and then you can see that you've now launched a whole bunch of resources, and then your compliance score starts to drop, then you know there's a problem with your most recent deployment. Right? And you also have a timeline history for how your account or your conformance pack has been compliant over a period of time. Right? So this is another easy tool for you to actually look at how compliant your conformance pack or your account is. So this is good. So now, so you have a few tools that John can use, right, for managing risk. Let's see, this will work. Okay, there we go. So when you're setting up compliance, a very critical part of setting up compliance is ensuring that you have the right policies deployed in your account. Right? Today, if you look at config rules, there's two types of config rules depending on who authors the config rules. If AWS authors the rules, we call these as managed rules. So we have close to about 300 such rules, and we're constantly adding more rules. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover all the use cases, right? So that's why we have a second category of rules where you can author your own config rules, which we call as custom rules. And we support Java and Python-based rules. And here I'm going to show you an example of a config rule. So this config rule is going to check if the EC2 instance that is being launched is part of the allowed list of instance types. So you can see this code is fairly long. It's like a few tens of lines. Bulk of this code, what it's doing is actually error checking, making sure that you have the right permissions, making sure that the CIs are not oversized. So there's a lot of error checking that happens. Right? So what we launched earlier this year is support for DSL, which is a domain-specific language. We added support with CloudFormation Guard. What CloudFormation Guard gives you is it significantly simplifies the rule authoring experience. So, as a comparison, that same rule that I showed you in the previous slide is just 4 lines for you. That's all you have to author. You do not have to worry about any of the error checking. Right? You don't have to worry about permissions. You also do not have to worry about maintaining infrastructure. So, in the previous case, if you were using a Java or Python to author these config rules, they run on a Lambda, so you actually have to also maintain the Lambda function. So in this particular case, with DSL, all you provide to config is, this is the actual business logic of the rule. Everything runs in the config account. So it's significantly simplifies the rule authoring experience. So the way to think of this is just policy as code. So that's all you're authoring. You're just authoring the policy. You're not dealing with any of the error checking. So just to summarize, so we looked at how John can manage risks, looked at a few tools that he has at his disposal. We also talked about how we simplified the rule authoring experience. So as you're trying to deploy policies, now you can quickly, easily deploy policies as well. So this is good, right? So everything is working fine for John. But can we do better? That's a question we asked ourselves. Answer is yes, we can. So yesterday we launched proactive compliance. So the idea with proactive compliance is, can we actually check before a resource is created, is it going to be compliant or non-compliant? So far everything that we talked about with rules was after the fact. You create the resource, and then the resource is evaluated for compliance. But is it possible to actually check before I even create that resource, if I created this resource, would this resource be compliant or non-compliant? That's what we launched yesterday. So the benefit with this is, now by checking if this resource is going to be compliant or non-compliant ahead of time, you actually save yourself time, and it also reduces your security risk. Let's take the same example of the S3 bucket. If you could check prior to the creation of the S3 bucket, if you have encryption enabled by default, right? And then you are notified if it's going to be compliant or non-compliant, and then you take the decision whether you want to proceed or not, right? So obviously, if it's non-compliant, you're not going to launch the resource. So this way, you save yourself that risk exposure, security exposure, or an operational pain ahead of time before the resource is even created. So this is the way proactive compliance would work is it's going to be the same config rule that was used for detective or it'll be proactive. We use the word detective for the use case where the resource is created, and then after the resource is created, you're going to take an action, right? So that's what we're going to call as detective. And then proactive is where you're now going to call the rule before the resource is going to get created. So it's the same rule. So you author the rule once, and it's the same rule that can act both for detective as well as proactive compliance. And we'll go into more details, but just at an overview level, This will also integrate with CI/CD pipeline and CloudFormation. We'll talk about that in a minute. So how does this work? So there's really 3 steps for proactive compliance. The first one is deploying the rule. Second is invoking the rule. And the third is you're going to check for the status of the execution. So let's look into more details. Deploying the rule. So this is the same API, CLI console that you would use, how you would deploy a detective rule. So you'd use, in this particular case, we're showing you have your put config rule API. So you call the API. What's new is, let's see if this will work. Second point, doesn't work. All right. So what's new is if you look at the last 2 lines, rule execution mode. That's the new optional parameter that's there to the CLI. The default value is detective, which is how things used to work in the past, right? And what we've launched recently is what we're calling as proactive. So when you're deploying the rule, you can either deploy the rule as detective only, which means this rule will execute only when the resource changes, or you could deploy the rule as proactive, or you could do both. If you're going to do both, you actually have both these lines there, like how shown on the screen here. So this is your first step where now you're deploying the rule. And what's new is now you're going to invoke the rule. So prior to proactive compliance, all you had to do was you deployed the rule, and then the rule could get executed under 2 scenarios. One was when the resource was created or updated, right? So that's what we call as a change-triggered config rule. When the resource gets, when there's a new update to a resource, and if you have a corresponding config rule, the rule gets evaluated. So that's one way of how a rule could get executed. A second way of how a rule could get executed was what we call as periodic rules, where at a given frequency of time, you're going to execute the same config rule. In the case of proactive rules, you actually don't have a resource, right? So there's no change triggered or periodic at this point of time. So you're going to explicitly call the CLI with start resource evaluation. And what you're going to provide in this part of the CLI is the actual resource metadata. It's the CloudFormation schema. You're going to provide that as a parameter and say, now this is the resource I want to create, and you're going to call this CLI. What happens once you call this API or CLI is if your resource metadata is valid, we do a check for syntax and making sure the right attributes are there, and also ensuring that that rule is actually deployed. Assuming there are no errors, what you get in return is you get an evaluation ID, and it's like you get your 200, saying, yep, we've accepted the API. So it's an asynchronous call. So the first API, all you get back is that your API was accepted with a client ID, right? And then subsequently, you'll make a second API call with that evaluation ID that you got from the previous call. And now you're going to call for get resource evaluation summary. Now, as part of this second API is where you will actually get the data if your resource that you're attempting to create is going to be compliant or non-compliant. So now you can make an informed decision at this point of time whether you want to proceed or not. So how this would integrate with your CI/CD pipeline or CloudFormation templates is you basically would have to think of this as two API calls prior to actually creation of the resource. One is for invoking the config rule, and a second API to actually get the status, right? And then based on that, you can, if it's compliant, then you can continue on with the creation of the resource. If it's non-compliant, you don't have to continue. So that's with CI/CD. And then with CloudFormation, the way this will work is you can actually create a custom hook with this exact same code that's deployed as a custom hook, and it's the same logic that you would have in your CI/CD is going to have in your custom hook as well. So this is how you can actually implement, it's where we're calling this like shift left from a compliance standpoint, because now prior to the creation of the resource, you can actually check to see if the resource that you're attempting to create is going to be compliant or not, right? Like I said earlier, one of the key benefits with this is going to be, it's the same rule that you're authoring for detective can also be reused for proactive, right? So from a rule authoring experience, you're authoring it once, and then you're deploying it once, right? So we talked about some of the innovations that we had in config that John can use. To continue on with CloudTrail on how John can look at forensics and with CloudTrail, I'll hear from Suchita.
Awesome. So I will talk to you about AWS CloudTrail, and I'm making an assumption that most of you do know what CloudTrail is, but I'm still going to go back and just spend 30 seconds to talk about what CloudTrail is and what it gives you. So, all right. And also we'll talk about how John has set up some things. Andres mentioned that he's already set up CloudTrail trails via Control Tower, and he understands a little bit what CloudTrail is providing. So overall, CloudTrail is an AWS service that does a very simple thing. It captures all activity that is happening in your AWS environment and provides to you, which you can use as auditing or compliance aid, given that it is the authoritative source of every action that is happening in your AWS environment across your all regions, across all of your accounts. It is being used for security investigation. It's because of the information that CloudTrail captures. It is very relevant for security investigation to figure out who is doing what and when. And that's exactly what CloudTrail captures. And then it is also used for operational troubleshooting. We go down to resource level. What activity is happening on a resource? Who is accessing S3 bucket? What objects are they accessing? So it has all of that information, and put together, they can help you figure out some really difficult questions about security investigations and about auditing. So let's go back to John. So John has established CloudTrail trails. He understands that CloudTrail logs provides us the information to answer basic questions. These are some of the questions that his colleagues are asking him, and these are the questions that is keeping him up in the night. So some of the questions that are coming up is, one is, who is accessing my sensitive information? How often? And should they really be accessing this information? Some other questions that can come up is my organization following security and auditing best practices? And what can I do about that? And then a simple question, why is my application running so slow? So these are the questions that John is being asked. He needs to come up with answers, and in certain cases, fairly quickly. So let's see what John already has access to. What has he done after attending Andre's session at reInvent? So this is what he has. He has created CloudTrail trails using the AWS Control Tower. What it does is CloudTrail, as I said, captures everything. It is the source of information that then John needs to take a look at and then try to answer those questions. So CloudTrail captures every action that is happening in the environment and delivers them into an S3 bucket that John has configured when he was creating a trail. So as CloudTrail events. Now this bucket, in a typical scenario, when specifically a security team is managing these trails, this bucket is really important. He needs to make sure that this bucket, only certain people can access this bucket because it has information relating to auditing. So he makes sure that this bucket is fairly protected. This bucket holds information across his organization. And then he also has to manage the life cycle of the information that is staying in this bucket. So this is the source of the information that John knows he has, something that he needs to read into, dive deeper into to figure out the answers to the questions that people are asking. So how does he do that with trails today? So the first thing that John will have to do, he'll have to extract this data out of this S3 bucket, prepare it so that it's ready to be queried. Once he has prepared it, then he can run analysis on top of that to answer those questions, slice and dice this data, figure out, dive deep what he wants to do. This is a typical scenario. Most of our customers actually are using this, and this works really well. They can use AWS services, as I've mentioned over here, to prepare. They could use Glue, and to analyze, they can use Athena. And this works. And some of the customers also use third-party solutions to do the same thing. The trick is, John is still wetting his toes. He still doesn't really understand how to use Glue. He does not know how to use Athena. He understands that he needs to get to it, but there is a learning curve in putting this services together, in stitching the solution to going from the information that he has, then to be able to get the insights out of it. So he can do two things. He can spend time and resources to figure out how to use AWS Glow or Athena. He also needs to figure out how the AWS events, the CloudTrail events, are structured to be able to really quickly go into Athena, write the queries that work, and then run them and come up with answers. Or he has to find resources within his organization who know this, who know how to do this, right? But then this S3 bucket is really locked down. Not everyone should have access to this S3 bucket. So what are his options? So he is perplexed, and that's when he talks about or finds out about CloudTrail Lake. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of CloudTrail Lake, but we launched this earlier this year. And what it really is, it is a managed solution to what Trails provide today. It is a managed audit data lake. That's the data that it captures. That's CloudTrail data. It will aggregate and store this information for John or for our users, and it will also have a layer of SQL to do the analysis. So think of it as everything that you saw wrapped up into one solution. Now, a couple of things about CloudTrail Lake. One thing that we had heard from our customers is storing this data is important. In many cases, people have to store this information up to 7 years to meet compliance needs, or even longer in certain industries. And they have to maintain the life cycle of this data. That's something that takes time, understanding, and all of that. And then if there's security investigation that you have to do historically, you have to bring that data back and then run the analysis on it. And CloudTrail Lake solves that. So here are some of the benefits. One, it's a turnkey solution. You don't have to move data anywhere. Once you enable this, CloudTrail will capture the data. It is still the source of that data. It will put it in the bucket, and you can analyze it over there. The data is stored here for up to 7 years, and you can query this data anytime. You don't have to manage the data life cycle. How long do you want to save it? When do you move it? And you don't have to do the cost optimizations in this particular case. And then, I don't know about everybody over here, but I'm not a SQL geek. The best I can do is give me a query, I can run it, I'll understand how the data is structured to get a feeling of the schema, and then I'll copy, paste, edit, right, to meet my use cases. So that's something that we are very aware of, that not everyone wants to go into SQL and write it from scratch. So there are sample queries to get you started. And these are not just sample queries just out of the blue. Some of the sample queries, and I'll walk you through it, are based on use cases, based on the questions that we know security teams are being asked. So you can take these queries, edit them, and then run them to meet your needs. You don't have to spend any time on ETLing the data. That is done. CloudTrail understands the data that we are capturing, so when we did the ETL for this data, it is optimized to run query faster. So you don't have to fine-tune the queries, or you don't have to worry about the timing out. If you do, please reach out to us, and we'll figure it out. And then the biggest thing over here is immutable storage. I did mention that typically when security teams manage these trails, they have to make sure that the bucket that is holding this information is immutable. And CloudTrail Trails, they can do it because we provide something called log file validation, which helps customers figure out that if somebody has tampered with the log, they will figure it out. But they cannot stop anyone from tampering the log, other than the policies that S3 bucket provides. With this, because it's a managed service, it is immutable by design. The only thing that users can do is read-only access to this data. So John or any user can be very confident that when they are making decisions based on the information that they are analyzing within CloudTrail Lake, they can be confident that the data has not been tampered with. So they can be confident that their questions, their answers are right. There's nothing wrong with that. So now John has a new thing that he found out. He wants to try it out. And we'll see if this meets his need or not. And I'll walk you through a particular use case and see if it can help him. But before I go there, I do want to talk about some of the new features that we had launched recently. The one that we launched just yesterday was our integration with AWS Config. Now, CloudTrail Lake already captures who did what and when. So there's action and what is happening. With this integration, we can also see the compliance history and the resource configuration that AWS Config provides. So one use case that John can get to is he has seen a resource as being non-compliant. he now has more information within the same place to do some more forensic analysis to figure out, is there a relation between the actions that is captured by CloudTrail versus the config changes that is captured by config. So he has more information, more context to make a decision on that. Or he can also look at compliance history. All of the resource changes or non-compliance resources that are across all of the organization, he can do it, run a simple query, and then see it by account. And then the other one that we launched, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, was our integration with AWS Audit Manager. And both of these, Andres would be covering in the demo. So I won't talk much about it, but you can now use CloudTrail Lake to store your audit evidences and then use the APIs to search those, or it is available in the evidence finder feature within Audit Manager. So those are the 2 new features, and as I said, Andres will be covering it in the demo. So now let's get back to John. And I would walk you through a situation that John has found himself to be in, and he wants to get an answer fairly quickly because this does look like probably like a security issue. So, and this is an issue that we worked with one of our largest customers, and they were facing this issue. So I'm just putting that in John's world. So John has identified that a particular IAM access key, access ID key, was being used every 10 to 15 minutes regularly. But he could not figure out what is this user doing, what was the action that he was taking, and what resources was he touching. Now, John did a couple of things before he looked at CloudTrail Lake. The first thing he did was looked at CloudTrail event history, which is a feature that CloudTrail provides to all AWS customers, which captures and displays the control plane activities that has happened between the past 90 days. So control plane activities is somebody created a resource, somebody logged in, and things like that. So management plane activity, we call them management events. So one thing that he could figure out very quickly was this person, whoever was using this access key ID, was not creating a resource or was not doing control plane actions. He was doing something on the resource, which is what we call data events. So accessing a bucket, accessing an object in a bucket, and things like that. So he wants to figure out what is this person doing. So this is what he does. John sets up an event data store in CloudTrail Lake. Event data store is the resource that captures all of the events that CloudTrail is generating and makes it available for querying. And then he goes down, he enables management events. He enables data events because in this particular case, he knows that this is what he wants to look at. And he turns on configuration item because this was just launched and he's interested in knowing what's happening. And then he goes back. As he turns it on, he has to wait for 10 to 15 minutes because he knows that is the frequency at which this key is being used. He goes back to the sample queries that CloudTrail Lake has provided, and there's a sample query that he finds which says investigate user action. And this is what the query looks like. So it gives you event ID, event name, which is the name of the action, event source, typically it is the service where the action is being invoked, event time, when the action has taken place, from the EDS that he has just created, and there were other conditions that are not relevant to John. He doesn't care about the time limit because he just turned EDS on, and he doesn't have the username of this user identity. So he understands what this query is. It's fairly simple. And then he goes ahead and removes the things that he doesn't want. And then he just puts the information that he does have. So he basically now says, give me all of this information from this EDS where user identity.accessKeyID is the access key ID that he has seen is being used. So he makes these changes, waits for 10 minutes, and then runs the query. And what he finds is within the time limit, within 10 to 15 minutes, he's able to identify that a particular user has downloaded an object, basically did a get object API call on an S3 bucket. Now, this in itself is a pretty normal thing to do. Anyone would do that. What is concerning was the frequency, 10 minutes, right? So this gets him thinking. He wants to now know what is this person doing that is leading him to do an action every 10 minutes. And he doesn't care about all the S3 buckets that he has in an organization. The only S3 bucket he cares about is the one that holds sensitive information. So this is what he wants to do. He wants to dig deeper. He wants to see what is this user doing. Is he accessing this particular S3 bucket that I'm concerned about? And within that S3 bucket, what information, what object is he accessing? So for this, one thing that he'll need to do is he'll need to have some historical data into EDS. He just turned on the EDS. Right now, it's only capturing what is happening at this time. The EDS does not have information from the last 30 days, but he had trails enabled. So there is information that is sitting in an S3 bucket, and he is able to import that information into the EDS and then do the analysis on that. So what John does is he goes back to CloudTrail console, goes to Lake, and he imports events, CloudTrail logs, historical CloudTrail logs that were sitting in the S3 bucket that he had configured, and he executes the following query. Now this query also exists. A similar query exists in the sample query, but I've already modified it. So what he's looking at the user identity, who, he's looking at what event name, is it a get call, is it a put object call? He's looking at the exact object that this person is accessing. So he gets that information from a field in event, in our event, which is called request parameters, and he gets the actual key as an S3 object. He says from EDS ID, and then he goes, I only care about when the bucket name is equal to the bucket name that I care about. I don't want to see anything else from any other bucket. And then I have the user identity access key ID. At this point, I'm only concerned about this particular user. So he runs this query for the last 30 days, and then what John finds out is that this user has accessed information of a particular customer, two customers, multiple times in the last 30 days. Now, this is also a very normal thing to happen. Maybe the user was an account manager of this customer, and he's accessing this information. But John does want to close the loop on this and make sure that this person has the permissions and has the reason to look at this information. So he does go back, shares this information with the central security team for further analysis, and then whatever path that goes from there. So this was just an example. And all of this thing did not take more than, I think it was an hour or so that John spent to get this information. There are many more use cases that he can get to with CloudTrail Lake. And that's my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suchita, and thank you, Karthik. As you can see, many cool and new features of both AWS Config and CloudTrail. Now let's talk a little bit about Audit Manager. How many of you are familiar with Audit Manager? How many are familiar? Know what it is at least? We're very excited about Audit Manager. It's a new product. It was launched over a year ago. In this journey of John, one of the things everybody has to do, he has to do, and you probably have to do it, is at some point you have to get ready for an audit. And you know how it is, right? All hands on deck, a lot of screenshots, a lot of running around to try to get all the information you need to provide to the auditor. So that's where Audit Manager helps. I'm not going to do a deep dive on Audit Manager. I want to talk about one new feature that is going to help John on these some of these new challenges that he has. If you want to take advantage of a deep dive of Audit Manager, tomorrow there's COP304. It's going to be tomorrow. I think it's at Caesars Forum. COP304 is a chalk talk, and it's very interactive, and you'll have a chance to ask questions if you want to learn more about Audit Manager. But Audit Manager, very briefly, automates the process of collecting all the evidence you need for a specific for an audit. The way it works is that you deploy what's called a framework. Those frameworks are based on some of the most common compliance regimes that are out there, PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP. We have some of the most common ones. Those frameworks are customizable because every customer, every environment is different, but at least we give you a place to start, and you can add, modify, remove some of the controls that are defined there. And then when you do that, you deploy that framework, and then the system starts collecting all the evidence that is defined by that framework, right? And what happens is John, our friend, the cybersecurity engineer, has been taking advantage of Audit Manager. He turned it on for a specific framework He's been collecting all the evidence. So he knows he has all the evidence there. He wants to produce effective audit reports for the auditor when it comes in. But one of the challenges that he was running into is there's a lot of evidence. How do I know which one to provide to the auditor? Maybe the auditor comes in and says, you know what, I want you to give me all the evidence for control number blah, 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 right? I want all the evidence you have for all of your accounts, for all your regions, for that specific control only. That's what I want, that's what I need at this very specific moment. Before, what we're gonna talk about today, John had to dive through all the paperwork, all the PDFs, and try to find the evidence. Well, we released a couple of weeks ago, Evidence Finder. It's a new feature of Audit Manager that what does is it allows you to perform, as you can see there, targeted searches by multiple criteria, group the results, and send the data to an assessment report. So now you can say, okay, for my production account in regions A and B, give me the evidence for controls X, Y, and Z. Produces a result, and you can take that and create an assessment report for the auditor. It's interesting, because we've been talking a lot about CloudTrail Lake, that the back end for Evidence Finder is CloudTrail Lake, which I think is pretty cool, right? So what we're doing in behind the scenes, when you go turn on this feature, is we create an event data store on the back end that is collecting all the evidence for your audit, and then we have provided a very nice front end, I'll show it to you in a demo, that allows you to search and see all that data. And speaking about that, let's go to the demo, because that's a lot more fun. By the way, Sachin, did you take a picture of me already? Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, very good. So in this demo, I want to walk you through, I want to walk you through the scenario of the challenges that John was facing. Remember we talked about having more control over the custom rules. And Karthik showed us a little bit about those awesome CFN guard policy rules that you don't have to write 150 lines of code in Python or whatever. You can just write a DSL. Let me show you an example of how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the config console here. I'm going to go to rules. And it's very simple. I'm going to go ahead and add a rule. And in here, I select that I want to create a custom rule using guard. I'm going to click next. And my demo. And I can put here testing, whatever I want. By the way, everything that I'm showing you is available through the API and through CloudFormation also. And then here's where we put the actual code that we want to evaluate. I'm going to cheat, because I have all this stuff here. And I'm going to copy it from here. This is a very simple CFN guard rule that what it does is it takes in a parameter, and that parameter evaluates for a specific volume type. I could say for GP3, make sure that my IOPS is 3,000, 4,000, as you can see there. So it's a very specific rule, and that's just an example where you can get very particular in how you do the evaluation. Then look at this. This is pretty cool. I can tell you right now, if I wanted to make this a proactive rule, Karthik talked about that I can use to evaluate resources before they are created. I can just turn it on right here, and that's it. I can put tags, and I can do all that, and then as soon as I click Add Rule here, it will go ahead and create the rule, and my rule will be active. So in a very simple way, John has been able to create a rule that is going to address the specific control that he needs for IOPS related to GP3 volumes in his environment. We're going to do a little bit of the cooking show now, because I'm going to go back here. So after he has created his rule, now we need, the other thing is the shift left thing for compliance, right? Being able to detect things before they are created. And the way you can do this with this new feature of proactive rule is you have your CI/CD pipeline that you're using maybe to deploy your CloudFormation templates. And what we need to do is just add a step in that CI/CD pipeline that's going to take advantage of this new API call. And here's the way it works. So The first thing is, once we have the rule deployed and created, by the way, if you wanted to create the rule from the command line, this is an example of how that's done, as you can see there. Put config rule is the API call, and this is the content, but we're not going to spend too much time on that. But the first thing you do is you add a step that is going to start the resource evaluation, as you can see there. Hopefully that's big enough. And I'm using a file that has the resource description. It's called resource.json. I'm going to show you that file. And basically what this file is it defines the resource type, resource ID, resource type. The resource ID is for reference only because the resource doesn't exist yet, of course. It's just something that you can use for reference. The resource type you want to evaluate, which in this case is an SNS topic. And then on the resource configuration, that's where all the CloudFormation code will go, right? This is where the exact same thing that is in a CloudFormation template for a resource, that's where that would go, right? So it shouldn't be hard to do some parsing with JQ or something so that you can populate that. I actually did that when I was preparing the demo, and it's quite easy to do. So that file now contains everything. By the way, you can do all that in the command line also, but I'm going to go ahead and execute that in my console here so you can see how it works. And of course, I expect this demo to crash at any point, right? Like it usually does, but we'll see. All right, so I'm going to hit enter, and look at that. I got a resource evaluation ID back, which is basically my identification, because what happens is once you submit the resource for evaluation, the evaluation is happening on the background. We're constructing a configuration item based on the data you provided us, and then we're hitting that against all the rules that you provide. Maybe you have deployed. Maybe you have 10 rules deployed that this specific SNS topic can be affected by it. So we're doing that on the back end. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to get the status of that. So there's another API call, as you can see here on my screen, that is called, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to copy this and then paste this. That is called Get Resource Evaluation Summary. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And let's see where we're at with that. So as you can see, I got the result. It's still evaluating. It says that it's in progress. But eventually, once the evaluation is completed, you will see a non-compliant or compliant result from this API call. Then, on your CI/CD pipeline, you can make a decision. If it's non-compliant, I'm going to stop the deployment of this CloudFormation template. I'm going to send a message to the owner to say, this is non-compliant, or you can take any action you want. So that's very simple how proactive compliance works, just an API call. The cool thing is that it evaluates the resource against all the rules that you may already have deployed that are activated for proactive compliance. So that's a little bit about proactive compliance. The other thing is that we talked about today is CloudTrail Lake integration with AWS Config data. So for those of you that are familiar with AWS Config, as Config tracks all the resources, all that data is being put into an S3 bucket, right? So we figure, wait a minute, that's kind of like CloudTrail, right? Wouldn't it be awesome if I can take that data and analyze it in the same way, in a very simple way? A lot of customers were already doing the same thing Suchita described, which is doing Athena, Glue, massaging that data so that they could query it. So let me show you how that works. So I went ahead and created a CloudTrail Lake event data store for config. It's very simple. You just go to event data store, create. You say, hey, I want configuration data from AWS config, and that's it. Once I do that, now we'll have, and the name I gave it, as you can see, I don't know if that's too small. Let me see if I can make it bigger. It's called my config EDS, as you can see there. And I have a sample query here. What this sample query does is that for a specific period of time, it will tell me how many types of resources were tracked in config, like how many buckets were modified, how many EC2 instances. And if I run it, it's a very simple query. See, it's running, and it found 7 records, and here it is. So you can see we have 4 buckets, some association compliance, and it's of course by region, right? So this is, You can do multi-account, multi-region. So when you set up the config event data store, you can say, I wanted all my accounts and I want all my regions to go to one event data store so that I can query at any given time. So that is super cool, and we're very, very excited about that. And the last thing I want to show you real quick is Evidence Finder in Audit Manager. This is how Audit Manager looks. And if you go here, if this is the first time you're going to play with Evidence Finder, you have to go to Settings, and you have to go here to Evidence Finder and enable it, which I thought I had enabled there, but maybe I don't have it enabled on that account. I told you this was going to crash at some point. Oh, it's because I'm in the wrong region, that's why. Okay, let's go to the right region. Once you enable Evidence Finder, what we're going to do is in the back end, we're going to create an event data store for Audit Manager data. And we're going to start sending all that evidence into that event data store. But the cool thing is, we made it even more simple because we now provide, as you can see here, this very nice interface. So initially, you don't even have to write a SQL query. You can just come here and pick up some criteria. For example, I'm going to say, you know what? I want my SOC 2 assessment that I'm running. I want to do the last 30 days. Let me apply that. And I want everything, compliant, non-compliant, and conclusive. I don't want to group the results, right? So this is a very simple, I could get very specific here. I'm going to hit search. And what that's going to do is going to construct my SQL query. It's going to send it to CloudTrail Lake for the Audit Manager event data store, and it's going to give me back the results right in there in the console. And let me see, still searching, and there we go. So we get all the results, and this is where we can get very specific, and we can say, hey, you know, show me for control blah, or show me for this region, or show me for this account, and then once I find what I need, I can just tap on it, look at the details, and I can click this button here and generate an assessment report for that specific set of data that I was looking for. If I go right here to CloudTrail, you see that there is an Audit Manager evidence data store, which is this. And if I go here and I say, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me go back there. What I wanted to show you is how I can just run a query on the event data store so you can see how the raw data looks on that Audit Manager event data store. So I'm going to type select star from, I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, which is the event data store. I'm going to do a limit 100 because I don't want to be here until 3 in the afternoon. But I have what? Oh, you have 2 E's. Yeah, there you go. Select. Okay. Thank you. Nice guy. And I got like 100 results right there, as you can see. So let me show them to you. So again, you can get very specific now. If there's some very specific data that you want and you are very good with SQL, you could do that, or you can use the interface for it. Now, going back to finish our presentation here real quick. That's our demo. So here are some takeaways that we want you to walk away from this presentation is the importance of AWS Config, how now CloudTrail Lake is integrated into everything and it's super powerful to help you with your compliance and auditing, and the awesome features of Audit Manager also. If you want to learn more about cloud operations, please scan this QR code. There are some resources there. There's a couple more resources here if you want to check out some of our samples that we have on GitHub of how you can deploy this at scale, of course, because the demos that I show you are for, console one-off. And thank you so much. Please don't forget to fill out the survey. We appreciate you having here today. Hopefully you learn a little bit more about compliance at scale at AWS. Thank you.